Yeah, let's first of all, to break the ice, let's give a warm welcome to my panelists. Basma next to me from Making Moves. That's going to be a really interesting perspective to that. Sara Veal from Uplift Games, totally remote at the moment, and a workplace experience manager. And then Russ on the end. Please ignore the writing up there. Russ Clarke of Payload Studios, who are a game developer who've made some really great games, but also have this really interesting mix of incubator, shared office space as part of their studio. So kind of a potential way forward. So yeah, let's give them all a warm welcome to start with. Thank you. And very briefly, we'll go this way. Just a brief, again, as people have heard me talk enough, just a brief introduction to sort of who you are and what your business is.
My name is Basma. I am one of the associate directors at Making Moves London, and we are a commercial property consultancy, and we specialise in helping creative businesses with their office and studio space. We do a lot of work with some of our partners like Yuki, and work very closely with some of London's biggest mobile and console and PC developers and studios to advise them on their studios and really, in the wake of the pandemic, some of the changes that may need to take place, and really help them to envisage the future of their working environment and help their teams have a platform to collaborate and create games from.
My name is Sara Veal. I'm the Workplace Experience Manager at Uplift Games. We're a remote-first studio with employees in the UK and the US. My role is to lead projects and create events that foster connection and well-being across the company.
Hi, I'm Russ. I'm the CEO of Payload Studios. We're a London-based independent startup. We make the game Terratech. We're all about community in our approach to how we do things at Payload, and that also extends to the development community, which is why we came to start the Tentacle Zone that Will was alluding to earlier, which is a co-working space and development community collective, I guess. We do a lot of events and co-working stuff out of our office in Farringdon, or we used to, still do a bit. And we also have started a free incubator program for founders from underrepresented backgrounds, which is starting its second cohort imminently. In fact, I believe applications close on Friday. So please take a look at that if you think it could be interesting.
Great, thanks so much. And as a first question, actually, I kind of extends the introduction thing a bit. You know, I guess how the pandemic affected games business. There's a difference between a 30-year-old games company and a company founded in early 2021, right? It'd be I feel a bit of a cheat with this question, as if everything we're going to talk about could be the answer to this question. But just how the pandemic directly affected your businesses or organisations, and also just, where you're at as a business before the pandemic arrived. So we'll go in the same order again, Mo.
Yeah, I mean, from an office point of view, obviously the pandemic struck quite tough. Lots of businesses working remotely and very quickly adopting that as a working model. Over the last 24 months, though, we've seen a massive return to the office or to the studios. Lots of businesses are coming back, but it's definitely a very different capacity. So they're not all taking lots of fixed space. There's more emphasis on collaboration and open plan areas. And these are things, obviously, we'll talk about in some of the later questions. But the main sentiment is that companies want to return, but there has to be an air of remote working, and there has to be tools and services effectively in the office that can back that up for their employees, both internally and externally.
Well, the studio was always remote,
right,
but
yeah.
And the developers were working on the game together, like before the pandemic. And the developers included people in both the UK and the US. How it changed things for us is that we had like a company meetup in January 2020, and we're like, okay, there'll be more of these, and that put those on pause. So yeah, we're trying to make that happen again this year.
And yeah, Russ, I mean, Tentacle Zone started before the pandemic, right? It was almost fortuitous as to the future ahead.
Well, kind of. It wasn't exactly fortuitous in that we'd just taken a bunch of extra space, like pretty much before the pandemic happened. So we had to adjust to a few things. But yeah, I mean, we kind of started at the opposite end of the spectrum as a studio. We were a fully in-house studio. We were in the process of trying to close an investment round so that we could scale. So we were all about that, and that was Monday. And then on Tuesday, suddenly we were moving out and having to go fully remote, so from one extreme to the other. So it's certainly been an interesting journey trying to adapt to that.
Amazing. And yeah, to move on to the kind of questions proper, I guess when I was thinking about this issue overall, there's what we're at is a point of so many different opinions or preferences, and so naturally not a point of consensus, right? Like your team, I was working from home before it was cool, like 7 or 8 years ago. So of course, that's what I've chosen, and there's talk of hybrid models, or that you really need to get back to full working models, or kind of these newer models like shared spaces. So I guess, just some thoughts, and anyone can chip in on any of those questions, like what you think the likely dominant models or emerging models. I presume we're going to see some companies go straight back to how it was, and others take different things. Mo, you're not a game developer, but for that reason, I'd like to put this to you first, because it's kind of really interesting, your perspectives with someone who understands, I guess, physical spaces to work in. Right?
Oh, absolutely. This is an interesting question, actually. There's almost two extremes to some of the companies that we've helped. Now, obviously, I can't really name any names, as you can appreciate in this industry, lots of NDAs and things like that. So without naming names, we've seen two extremes to the whole working model. You've got at one spectrum businesses who are led very, very heavily by the talent that they have for whatever reason, and it's typically because they're doing something maybe niche. So we work with a post-production company. They have a certain team that is responsible for a type of VFX and things like that, and that team is very, very hard to hire for. And so they do lots of things for this team to say, okay, well, what do you want for the workplace? And one of the answers, actually, we want to be a remote first business. We want to work from home. We want the comfort of working from home and all these other things. And these are things we need from you as a business. So there's that extreme. And then there's the other side of it, where businesses are actually taking on a stance and saying, well, we need to almost mandate some working days, and they're typically 2 to 3 days a week, and they tend to fall on like a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and they encourage their employees and their staff to come in and work and to collaborate and to do these sorts of things. But there are some companies who are making a full return, but it's very small. I mean, if we look at a study we did recently from around 500 companies, we had around 83% said, we want to work on this hybrid model, so it's 2-3 days a week. We had 7% saying they want to make a full return to the office, and then that very small remainder percentage just saying, actually, we'll go fully remote. So we are seeing most people coming in for at least a few days a week.
Wow, I wasn't actually expecting actual statistics on the likely models, but I'm very glad I put that question to Mo. Thank you. And yeah, from the game side, to put this to either of you, you've always been fully remote, right? Does nothing change for you guys, or have I got that wrong?
Oh, no, that's true. But I guess something that I wanted to add was I entered the game industry just a few months after the pandemic started. And part of why it was possible is because the company that I was doing a contract at already was doing a mixture of flexible remote working. So it was a job that I could apply for. And it was a job I could keep doing, when all the schools were closed. That company was Fell Better Games, and they went fully remote. They made a decision to close their office. So for me, it's important because there are people like me, who can't enter particular roles or jobs when there isn't that flexibility. And I think and also I think people have had a chance to really understand how they work better in these times. So I think that the remote working is very important in terms of opening up the possibilities of how people can work.
And yeah, Russ, I mean, I'm really interested in your thought. There's kind of a new model emerging with what you're doing, but just any thoughts you've got around what we've just been talking about.
Definitely a new model, yeah. I mean, to come back to what you said in the first place, I'm actually not, I don't know any studios who are going fully back to the way things used to be. I'm interested that you said, Mo, that you know a few. It's very unusual, and certainly our company and most of the other people I talk to are basically of the view that old way of doing things is pretty much gone. Now we do still feel that there is a lot of value in the ability to come and work collaboratively for certain things, but we've also discovered through this sort of enforced experiment lots of things that actually work better and can only really be done in a certain way when everyone's remote. So really it's a process of trying to learn as much as we can from that and listen to what our team are telling us about how to get sort of the best of both worlds.
Right, interesting. And I'm you've all three of you said too many interesting things that basically, I'm going to just ask some slightly different questions from the ones written in front of me, because you brought up really interesting points. But I'm wondering about that thing. Flexibility in the hybrid model sounds really interesting, but I'm worried, I was going to say worried, that's not the word I meant to say at all, but I'm thinking about how you keep that kind of fair or balanced. You've got some staff that might want to be in the office, some not, some with different visions of flexibilities. Like, rather than what are the challenges, what are the solutions there to making, they're positive words to me, right? Flexibility and it being a hybrid and the best of both worlds. But yeah, solutions to the challenges of making that kind of workable and considerate of your employees.
One thing I think is, I've spent a long time working in offices, and one thing that's different is that it's harder to learn through like osmosis. You can't like observe like everybody. You're kind of just doing your things. And one possible solution to that, I think, is like mentorship, by like kind of really getting to know what people want to learn and how they want to grow, and seeing what you can do about that. So you've got to be quite proactive and deliberate about it. But yeah, or ambient kind of like working sessions. But that's not quite the same as getting to see everybody do everything.
Yeah, but I get, you bring up a really interesting point, right? Both have all of across the spectrum we're talking about, there's merit. So it's finding a way that embraces lots of them. Russ, what are you seeing? You're offering a shared space sometimes. I just wonder if people are like, we do that Tuesdays and Wednesdays, like have a very structured approach to keep for heart, embrace it all, or how's that playing out? Or how do you see it ideally playing out?
You asked about solutions. I think solution is a strong word. And, when I've got something I can call a solution, I'll be sure to let you know. But I think for a lot of companies, we're entering a period as things are starting to open up where we're going to be experimenting to try to find, maybe not a solution, but the best compromise.
Yeah.
And it's about trying to get the best you can from those different models of working. And you already put your finger on, what the kernel of that problem is. It's how do we line people up? Because in the consultations that we've had with our staff, we're getting a pretty clear message. Obviously they're all different, and there's no one size fits all solution. But by and large, people do want to have the experience of coming in to work alongside each other and get all the things that they were missing from that before, while balancing that with the benefits of being able to work remotely some of the time. But what everyone is clear on is that they don't want to come into the office and sit by themselves because no one else is in that day, right? And this is a non-trivial problem, which I guess is development language for a very difficult problem, which I think the only way to approach it really is to start with some kind of a structure that probably isn't going to be perfect or the final model, but that people can understand, and then ask everyone to work with you in good faith to learn from that and find your way towards a better long-term solution. That's how we're going to approach it.
Thank you for your thoughts and not solutions, Russ. And Matt, I'd just be interested, sort of building on perhaps what Russ was saying there, of like how you're seeing the practical balancing.
I think Russ, you've great analogies and examples there. It's there is certainly no one glove fits all solution. So there's really one big way I think a business can come together to actually try and identify the best possible solution for their studio, for their teams, and that's to do some sort of workplace study and just try to understand team needs, individuals' needs, what are the business needs, what are the business challenges, to be able to come up with a potential pattern, or say there is no solution, but some kind of normality that you can adhere to. So something that, just to kind of give you an ad hoc example, we see some teams who want to be remote first, but they completely miss out on culture, they completely miss out on learning, and actually they want to come in and experience those things. And that's where having maybe set days in the week where you maybe bring teams together who especially need to collaborate together within the departments, they can come in those days and use the office for that space. From an office usage point of view, it's less about actually coming in to do your 9 to 5. It is more about coming in to collaborate, to socialise. That's been a massive cultural shift that we've seen across the businesses that we advise. And this workplace analysis, this study that you can do will really help try to identify where you can bridge gaps. One thing you really want to avoid is having people who are going to be out of the office not feeling like they've missed out on anything, not feeling like they're not part of the team or not, involved in the day-to-day decisions of the business.
Right, that's interesting. It makes me realise you're talking about kind of the learnings we can take from, well, we can apply business analysis, and it sounds like the games industry can learn from the experience. All the other industries have been challenged by this, right? So,
Absolutely.
Cool. And I love that, it makes me realise it's about, in a nice way, I hope, people, you've mentioned, talking to your teams, how, and there's that thing, right? I guess this is a challenge in running businesses and teams in general, is you've got, who makes the decision? Is it the employer, the employee? It sounds like listening to the needs of your workforce. Brilliant. I'm twittering, Russ. Say something intelligent.
Best. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting you put it in that way, because in the final analysis, it is always the employee who has the last say, because they can just leave, right? Whatever you come up with.
Yeah, that's almost like voting with their wallets, so to speak.
Right, it's a fantasy to think
terms.
that you can dictate the solution. But generally speaking, in most cases, I would think your teams will be looking to you to provide some clarity, and not just to sort of vacillate and say, oh, we want the best of everything for everyone, So that's the kind of line that you have to tread, is first of all, talk to everyone, but ultimately you're going to have to come up with some kind of structured plan and accept that it's not going to be exactly what everyone wants. But when you do go and talk to your teams, you will probably find that they will tell you, we understand that there will be some need for compromise. These are our preferences individually.
Right.
But just tell us, make us feel that you've listened to us, give us a plan, and provided we don't feel that we've been completely ignored, we'll work with you.
Cool. Yeah, and I'd just be interested. In an existingly remote team, are there? Yeah, I'd be just fascinated to hear your thoughts. But maybe if there's a consideration of a shift to physical spaces, so to speak.
There is such a benefit to actually getting to be around one another in person. There's so much nuance that's lost, and there's a level of trust that maybe isn't as easy to build if you haven't met each other, because you're kind of, especially in our workplace, we often use voice and text rather than video for a number of reasons. And we're organizing regional meetups in the next couple of months, one for the UK employees, one for the US. We wanted to do it globally, but the COVID restrictions made that really hard to line up. And I'm conscious that we have quite a good turnout looking for both of those, but things might happen, people not come, and we're going to have to be conscious about those people who didn't come, and the ways in which we can kind of still help build their connections so they won't feel left behind just because there's there's a cluster of people who've all met and they haven't, and what happened, and communication's really important. I think that the nature of remote workplace is that more things are recorded, maybe too much information. But when you meet in person, you don't always note everything down. So you have to find a way to make sure that you're conveying all the information to people, getting ahead of them so that they don't hear things changed along the way.
Right, it's really interesting. What all three of you have said, it's almost kind of open-minded approach and kind of a structured flexibility, or Mo, is that what you're, in games particularly, but you serve the creative industries, does that kind of structured flexibility mean anything to you?
There's definitely some structure to it. Russ is right. I think especially in the creative world where it's hard to find talent. So one of the things that when we're speaking to some of our businesses, that they say to us, it's really hard to find good talent, and then it's very hard to keep them there because sometimes they can get swallowed up by the bigger corporates, especially if you're a smaller business trying to grow your team. So it's being able to create an environment that allows them to feel like they're getting what they want, but also for a business leader to be able to get the most out of those individuals. So I think, and I'm not saying it's for everyone, but having structure like a set working day can be quite helpful. One of our clients, they're quite a large business in the creative world. What they've done is they've got almost like a rule of thumb where if you can work solo, you're working on something solo, maybe you're doing some sort of coding, or it's something that doesn't really involve another team for that particular task, do that from home. You don't necessarily need to be in the office to do that, because if you're not going to interact with anyone and you're just going to sit in a sort of silo environment, environment, then actually that seat for that space can be taken up by somebody else who needs to come in. And actually, if you are doing collaborative work, you're going to be interacting with a team for the day, then you take up those seats, you take up that area, and then you engage with those teams, and everyone is sort of encouraged to come in for when they're needed to, but also on occasions where there are group events, things like you've mentioned, kind of meetups and things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting, basing around, I guess it's not quite role, but task, or right? Like, rather than saying, I don't know, everyone comes in Wednesday, it depends on the, sounds quite straightforward in a way, right? It depends on the context of the work. Yeah, sounds it. Sarah, I'd love to throw the next one to you first of all. I'm sure a lot of people have had their minds open to remote and working from home. Like, I certainly absolutely adore it, and having my own environment and bad taste in music and kind of, my working environment. But what are, as someone who's, what are the challenges of remote? The positives are tremendous, but what are the kind of challenges, especially maybe there's people that be, in the audience or watching the video that will be thinking, oh, maybe we're going to embrace this work, remote or work from home thing. It would just some pragmatic thoughts and challenges.
Communication is one of the biggest ones, because it's not so little of what we communicate is in what we write down and what people get out of it. And I think issues can kind of arise when you are in a bit of a vacuum with how you're perceiving something. So we try and be quite, it's still a massive learning process for us, but when we communicate things, kind of do a lot of perhaps it's a bit like when you're tweeting something, you're like, how could everyone react to this? And you kind of go around and prepare yourself and try, and you won't always get it right anyway. So communication's a really big one, because especially with the kind of context that we're in, with these really stressful times, and you don't know what people's situation is. Sometimes I worry when I deliver information to someone that they're they'll type back that's fine, and then actually it's awful, and they don't feel saying that, So we try and find ways of heading that off, we're trying to proactively create as safe, and kind of welcoming atmosphere as we can, and kind of head things off. Watch out for the signs the new signs you have to look out for with remote communication.
Right, that's really interesting, right? Because I guess kind of how collaboration is affected is fairly obvious, but team well-being, actually, like you say, knowing the communication matches it. Yeah, really interesting stuff. I wanted to swing to slightly more positive. I think everyone in the room can agree we'd all rather have not had the pandemic. So this question isn't to celebrate it happening or anything, but at the same time, I'd be interested to hear kind of positives or learning, whether we're talking about, maybe you're slightly more in the physical work world, but I'm sure there's been learnings there. Just, anyone's welcome to start, but what the opportunities have been in this context, or the opportunities people might be able to look to. But it's all right, you're not saying the pandemic was a good thing.
Well, it's a cliche to say, what doesn't kill you make you stronger. Certainly, it's been a very challenging time, but through struggling to work out how to deal with it, you do learn a lot, and there's things that you can discover, ways of working, ways of communicating that you hadn't really tried before that can be more effective. We have certainly learned a lot about communication, not just the importance of it, but ways in which it can work or fail to work. For example, Sarah was just talking about this. Being suddenly forced into a fully remote scenario, I don't think we had realized before just how much we depended on that sort of ambient communication that happens when a bunch of people are all in the same few rooms together. And we've had to do like a big sort of introspection of our processes and the ways we communicate to try to plug gaps that were always there, really, but we just sort of hadn't noticed because they were sort of getting papered over automatically. By and large, well, that has definitely been a very positive process, even though there are some things that ultimately are very difficult to replace completely. So we'll get the benefit of that when we start coming back in on a hybrid model. But ultimately we'll take a lot from it.
And Mo, I guess, I'm sure there are businesses moving back to working in offices all the time. But, how has the pandemic provided opportunities to kind of think about the physical working space?
Yeah, this is a really good question, and there's a massive answer to this, but I'll try and keep it very condensed. But where the opportunities have arisen is that as people, we're very social people, right? And we like to be. I think people like to be around each other and like to have communication with each other. And where the office has changed and where opportunities have arisen is that companies are now moving away from having this kind of fixed area where there's lots of fixed desks and you work in a big bank of rows, and they've moved to opening up the office to having more collaborative areas. So areas that are like all hand spaces, auditorium spaces like this have become so much more popular, where teams can just post up, they can have informal chats and catch ups. They can also double it up to use as maybe a breakout space, or do something different with their day. Other things that we've seen is, businesses that have maybe a sales team, for example, they can almost kind of not section them off, but create zoned areas where these people who are maybe a bit more buzzy, a bit more loud, through soft separations, can have like a section to themselves and do all those loud things and create all that kind of atmosphere and energy, without disturbing maybe other people who maybe want more quiet space and things like that. So the opportunity for creating a more well-balanced office is certainly increasing.
Yeah.
And technology adoption as well, where people are actually able to go and invest in better technology, especially for those that are communicating with people remotely, has improved as well.
Yeah, that's two really interesting points, right? The value of physical space and what we decide to do with it is an opportunity. I guess all the remote, thank goodness for the internet and collaboration tools over the last 2 years, right? But they can be a boon to the office environment. Sarah, just any thought, like what you guys have kind of embraced as opportunities through the horriblest time to be a human in a long time?
Well, I think I wanted to pick up something that
please do,
Russ
go
was
for it,
saying.
yeah.
You brought up how we've been experimenting more because of these times, and I think that's one of the best things. We said I think for a long time things were kind of static, or just changing very slowly, and because of the sudden change, we all had to try different things. Most didn't work, and I hope that we just keep doing that, and I hope that even as we can be in person more, we don't leave behind the people who can't join us for various reasons.
Yeah, that's a really lovely way of thinking it, right? It's given us a chance to think about people who already might have other reasons beyond pandemics to not be part of the physical workspace. Blimey, time is ticking. I always like to be neurotic about not having enough questions, and as ever, I haven't asked enough of my questions. Hopefully you guys got the warning about this potentially, probably is the last one, is a final tip for people in the audience. Now, that's a very broad question, whether it's about a really practical element, something specific to your area, or a kind of general tip about moving forward. Who am I going to... I've kept going this way. Russ.
I guess I'm saying what I already said before, but I think it's worth it. Talk to your people. Don't underestimate the importance or the amount and depth of that needs to happen. Like most of the things my company has learned, we've learned by doing it wrong. Early on in the pandemic, we had a big consultation. We thought we understood what to do. We made a big plan. And then 18 months later, when we finally looked like we could put that into practice, we said, right, let's do it. And we're a bit shocked at the amount of anxiety that came up over something that we thought was all sort of pretty much agreed. And, we just hadn't allowed for the passage of time, the fact that we'd hired quite a few more people who weren't there the first time around. We needed to go back again and ask them all in more depth and include them in that process, because it is all ultimately about inclusion.
Amazing. Whoever wants to dive in next.
Yeah, I think it's really important to mention to a lot of companies here today who are in there, still maybe retain some sort of physical space or thinking of going back to one. Don't be afraid to go out and re-engage it and re-evaluate it and rethink your office or your studio or the space that you currently cohabit. We've got lots of businesses who are still sitting there saying, actually, we're still not sure what the next 10, 12, 24 months might look like. So we'll just keep it as it is. And actually, that's probably not the right way of doing it, because the uptake from that perspective has been quite low for what we've seen. And all the businesses that we've helped who've rethought their office space and said, okay, this is what we're sitting in at the moment. We'd like to sort of engage with our teams, understand what they want and what they need, and what the business is going to need going forward, and then how can we reevaluate that space and transform it to add these collaborative spaces, to create zoned areas where you've got maybe a place for developers to go out and do their work quietly. All the new technology that people have maybe missed out on, or they're maybe afraid to invest in. By changing up your space, you can make some quite significant cost savings, and you can reinvest that, reallocate that money into technologies that, speed up communication, that give you better channels of communication. Something that we experienced as a business, at the start of the pandemic was a lot of teams had found that, audio visual stuff wasn't particularly great. We had to spend money on this and upgrade it, but the very first instance wasn't particularly great. And those people that were working remotely almost felt disengaged from maybe meetings or from some of the things that we were doing that were all online driven, because they couldn't hear things properly or they couldn't see things properly. There's lots of lag and it wasn't particularly great, and they just thought, okay, I'll just leave it in the background. And because of that, you do lose the engagement, and somebody who may normally have an incredible idea or speaks up in meetings probably just sat there sitting in the background thinking, I'll maybe mention it afterwards on a Slack note or something. So I think it's really important that businesses, now that there's an opportunity to do it, just rethink, where you're at in your business life cycle and what you can do going forward to curate a space really that works for everyone.
Yeah, that's really interesting, that curating a space. I love it makes me think I could work in an office again. And last but certainly not least, Sarah, just any final insights or tips?
Yeah, so kind of to echo what Russ said, our approach is that we are in conversation with the people who make up our company because they are our company. And actually, me being hired as a workplace experience manager is kind of part of having that specifically to look at.
Yeah, that's a good point. To have someone in your role as part of a team, right?
It's easy for everyone to kind of just work very tightly with who they work with, and someone like me kind of talks to everybody.
Yeah, really interesting. Right, well, thanks so much. We've ended up pretty much on time, and I think that's slightly fast. So, what I really like as a takeaway, that's not to suggest this isn't challenging, even profoundly challenging. We're talking about being creative with spaces, being kind of human and thoughtful and listening to your team, being collaborative, kind of being exploratory. And I think they're all things the games industry can smash, can do well. So kind of really encouraging that the solutions aren't wildly outside of what we already know and hopefully what we're thinking about. With that as a final thought, we're done. Let's give a round of applause to the brilliant panelists.